I'm Paul Symons. I'm the Chief Sustainability Officer at Euroclear. Euroclear is the global financial market infrastructure for post-trade services in the financial services world. I'm responsible within Euroclear for all sustainability matters, and that includes the gathering of data, the reporting of it internally, both through the CSRD reporting structure, but also internally up to management and boards as well. And I also cover our carbon program as well. Yeah, look, I think the thing we found with the double materiality assessment is that it was a much bigger task than we expected. This is a really significant thing for companies to do. So we started by getting some external help in, some advice, and we used one of the big four firms in an advisory capacity to help us develop our approach. And I think we looked at this on a number of dimensions. We did some benchmarking, we did some peer reviews, just to have an understanding of how people were addressing these topics currently. Obviously that was before CSRD, but it gave us an idea of how other people in our industry were looking at these issues. We mapped out our value chain. We spent a lot of time on that, and I think we spent a lot of time on getting the internal governance right. So once we had undertaken the double materiality assessment, which took us a number of months, we did that through conversations internally with stakeholders. We did that through advisory groups, through steering groups, through the executive committee. And actually we found some of the most interesting conversations about double materiality were held with our board members. We interviewed a lot of our board members, the non-executives, independently, one-on-one, to get their views as well. And we then went back and went through the governance process again, taking those points into account and delivering a double materiality assessment. One of the most challenging areas, I think, was dealing with external stakeholders. This is a new process. So what we found happened was that you went and talked to some of your clients, and you talked to the relationship management that you had with that client, and that person brought along their sustainability expert. Now, the relationship management client didn't have any knowledge of sustainability, and their sustainability expert had no knowledge of the relationship with Euroclear. And so this was an extremely challenging dialogue, because people are not yet mature, I think, in stakeholders to be able to comment on their service provider from a sustainability perspective. They're very good at doing it from a product perspective, from a price perspective, from a service level perspective. But I think the industry is not yet mature enough to say what is it they want from us from a sustainability perspective. So out of the whole process, I think for us the most challenging bit was getting meaningful dialogue and meaningful information out of our stakeholders, and that's something we'll look to improve over the coming years. Yeah, I think there's a number of lessons we learned here, which hopefully people will find useful. I think the first lesson we learned was you must start early. Right? This process takes far longer than anyone thinks. Start early and sit down with your assurance provider as early as possible and map out what is expected. What we found from our assurance provider, who also happens to be our external auditor, we found that actually they were extremely helpful in literally providing us with guidance on the exam questions that they would be asking us to answer during the audit. And we're still in that process now. We won't be audited until early next year. And I found that to be an extremely helpful process. So we worked with them in a very bilateral, cooperative way for a number of months. That's still ongoing. And they're actually doing test audits at the moment on data and controls internally. And that is reported up through the executive committee through to the board audit committee. So this is done in full transparency. And both I and the auditors are present in the audit committee, and we discuss with the audit committee the progress that we're making. I think that's really important. The other area that I think we need to focus on is it's really important to bring your internal auditors along with this journey, because it's not always true that the internal auditor and the external auditor agree, and they have different focus points. So we spend a lot of time with internal audit as well, and we're subject to a rolling 3-4 month informal audit from our internal auditors, which again is really helpful in getting us to be focused on the main issues. I think the other area which I mentioned earlier, where people need to focus really quite closely is on governance internally. It is really important that firms set out the governance that is necessary for these double materiality assessments and the data and the final reporting to be signed off internally. You need real engagement with transversely across the business owners within the company, because sustainability is not just owned by the Sustainability Office, it's owned by each of the business owners. It needs ownership at the Executive Committee and it needs ownership at the board. And getting that governance structure in place early, together with internal dialogue, early dialogue with internal auditors and with external assurance partners, is absolutely key to success. I guess for many companies the value chain discussion is really complex, particularly if you've got cross-border products and services travelling around the globe and complex supply chains for physical goods. As a financial services company, our value chain in relation to suppliers is really quite simple, and therefore we have not found this a significant challenge in terms of data, with one exception, and that will be Scope 3 emissions, where the whole industry, I think, struggles with accurate Scope 3 emissions, and we are now in the position of having a program with our main critical suppliers to work with them to ensure that we can improve the quality of the Scope 3 emissions. That's the area that we're most focused on, but I'm very conscious that our challenges here are probably much less than those who have physical products and physical supply chains. Yeah, I guess my first comment was, if people think doing a double materiality assessment is complex, just wait till you try and do a transition plan. They are difficult, and the prime reason that they are difficult, I think, is because most companies tend to look at the future in sort of 3 to 5 year blocks. Right? That's the sort of strategic plan that a company might have from a financial strategic perspective. A transition plan might look 20 years out, or even longer, to 2050 if that's your target for net zero. And that makes it very, very difficult, I think, for executives and boards to be able to assess whether what they're producing is accurate and accurately costed and can actually be delivered. So producing a transition plan is complex. We're well on our way to hopefully producing one by the end of the year. We have a long way to go yet. But they have to be, I think, linked entirely to the strategic direction of the company. They cannot be left as a separate plan being run by the CSO team or by finance or by whoever, while the strategy of the company is being pursued in a different venue, in a different way. The two have to be linked, and I think that is one of the great challenges for the industry, because these are new. People have not had these before. I think people will again want them to be assured. I think we're going to have a question where all the industry will insist, and the stakeholders will insist, that the commitments that are made in the transition plan are externally assured. And again, this means you've got to start early, and you've got to get your governance right internally to ensure that you bring with you on this journey the internal stakeholders, your executive, your non-executives, and of course your clients as well. Huge challenge. Well, as I said, we're starting this journey from a position where none of this data was made public before. Certainly in our case within Euroclear, we've never committed to a long-term carbon journey before the transition plan is published. So you need to work on the data accuracy, you need to work on the data modelling, and you need to ensure that the conditions that you're putting in place for a reduction in your carbon emissions is consistent with your strategic journey. One large merger or acquisition by a company can completely destroy a transition plan, because you're not just buying a business, you're buying carbon emissions as well, and you're importing them into your own transition plan. So all this modelling of the potential future has to be done in line and in parallel with the strategic direction of the company. No, not yet. Not as we not on the date of this interview in late October 2024. We're getting a lot of external advice on how to construct them, but we have not yet put the transition plan through external assurance. I think that can only be done once I've got the executive committee and the non-executives on the same page, travelling in the same direction. Then we can discuss it with assurance providers. But for these things to be valuable externally and to be comparable externally, I think they have to be subject to some form of external assurance.